Most people in the Midwest swear they remember a time when every backyard had an apple tree. But very few remember the fruit that used to ripen in the shade. In the old neighborhoods, before the streets got widened, before every yard was measured into neat rectangles, you could still find them if you knew what you were looking for. Not planted in proud rows like an orchard, not staked up and trimmed into obedience. They were the kind of trees that seemed to happen on their own, as if the land had decided to keep one small secret for itself. Pawpaws. Even the name sounds like something you overhear rather than something you buy. A word said softly, the way folks used to talk about things that bruised easily, or things that didn't travel well. Back then, if you grew up near a river or a creek that wandered through cottonwoods and willows, you might have found pawpaws without anyone pointing them out. They grew along the margins of the Midwest the way certain songs did, half remembered, passed down without ceremony. You'd notice the leaves first, big and plain, like a child's drawing of a tree leaf. And then, late summer into early fall, you'd find the fruit, greenish, a little lopsided, hanging there like it wasn't sure it belonged. Pawpaws didn't announce themselves. They didn't shine. They didn't smell like cider or promise pie. They waited. And if you were lucky, and if you were patient, you'd open one up and see something that didn't quite fit the American backyard story people like to tell. It wasn't crisp. It wasn't tart. It wasn't anything you could pack into a lunchbox without consequences. It was soft, custard soft, creamy and yellow, with seeds like polished stones, and a flavor that made children squint and grown-ups pause. Banana, some would say, though most Midwestern folks didn't have bananas as a regular thing during the war years. Some said melon. Some said it tasted like something tropical, a word that in those days felt like a postcard from a faraway place. But Pawpaw wasn't far away. It was right here, native, quietly American in a way that didn't need flags or slogans. So how did something like that, something that had lived in the woods long before the first fences went up, quietly slip out of the backyards? That question sits in the mind the way a forgotten smell does. You don't notice it until it returns. In the 1940s, in parts of Indiana and Ohio and Illinois, down into Missouri and Kentucky too, yards still had a kind of looseness to them. Not everywhere, but enough places that you could walk a block and see a patch of garden behind one house, a grape arbor behind another, and maybe a pear tree leaning over a fence as if it belonged to both families at once. People planted what they knew, and they kept what the land offered. A lot of folks didn't plant pawpaws the way they planted tomatoes. Pawpaws were often inherited or discovered or tolerated. A pawpaw patch might have been there when the house was built, or it might have crept in along a back lot where the mower never reached. In small towns, some families knew where a thicket grew down by the creek, and every September they'd take a walk with a sack, like it was something between an errand and a tradition. You didn't see pawpaws at the corner grocer. You didn't see them in the paper ads. If you wanted one, you either knew a tree or you knew someone who knew a tree. And that kind of knowing, local, personal, tied to a particular bend in a particular creek, was once the way most food worked. It's hard to explain to someone now how normal it was to live with a certain amount of uncertainty. Some years the raspberries came in heavy, some years they didn't. Some years you had enough rhubarb to give away, some years it went thin. Weather decided a lot, so did time. So did whether the kids had the patience to help. Pawpaws fit that older rhythm. They weren't dependable in the way a supermarket is dependable. They were dependable in the way seasons are, if you paid attention, if you were present, if you accepted that a thing might be different each year. They ripened when they ripened. They bruised if you looked at them wrong. They had to be eaten soon or turned into something quickly. You couldn't stack them high, and you couldn't leave them in the sun. And that, in a way, is where the trouble began. The changes didn't come with any dramatic announcement. Nobody came to your door and said, "We're taking your pawpaw tree." There weren't headlines about it, no public meetings. It was smaller than that, quieter. It started with new habits, creeping in like evening shade. After the war, America began to build a different kind of life. People moved, not always far, sometimes just from town to the edge of town, from a house near the tracks to a new place with a driveway. But even a small move can loosen a tradition. You leave behind the creek path you used to walk. You leave behind the elderly neighbor who knew the names of trees. You leave behind the unspoken map of what grew where. And the new places, the new subdivisions, were tidy in a way older neighborhoods never tried to be. Lawns became a kind of standard, a clean sweep of grass, bordered by shrubs that behaved themselves. Trees were chosen from a limited list, the way a man chooses a suit from what the store carries. Maple, elm, birch, sometimes a crabapple, mostly for spring blossoms. A pawpaw tree didn't fit that catalog. It didn't look like much in the ways that mattered to new suburban tastes. No bright fruit you could show off, no well-known name, no sturdy branch structure that made it a proud shade tree. It was a little awkward, a little wild-looking, more understory than centerpiece. And pawpaws, in many places, don't like being alone. They often grow in patches. They send up little shoots. They form thickets if you let them. That's part of their nature and part of their stubbornness. But suburban life wasn't built around thickets. It was built around edges, property lines, mowers. So the first way pawpaws disappeared was simply that fewer people carried them into the new life. You can't miss what you never knew was supposed to be there. A child raised on neat lawns and store fruit doesn't grow up with the same sense that food might be found in a shady corner of the yard. And once that knowledge breaks, it doesn't easily mend. There's another layer to it, and it has to do with a certain kind of American confidence that rose up mid-century. The confidence that modern systems could solve the inconveniences of old ones. If a fruit bruised too easily, you didn't accept that as part of its character. You replaced it with a fruit that shipped well. If a fruit ripened all at once, you didn't gather the neighborhood to eat it quick. You looked for something that could sit in a cooler for weeks and still look perfect. The grocery store became a place of steady reassurance. Apples in every season, oranges in winter, bananas without interruption. Everything clean, uniform, and separated from the messiness of weather and soil. A pawpaw, soft, irregular, quick to spoil, was the opposite of that promise. In the old days, the fact that a pawpaw didn't travel well was simply a fact, like how cream turns if you leave it out. It meant you ate it close to where it grew. It meant it stayed local, intimate. But in the new food economy, not traveling well was almost the same as not existing. A fruit that can't be shipped becomes invisible to the modern imagination. And once it's invisible, it's easy to forget that it ever mattered. Somewhere in the 1950s and 1960s, a lot of American households stopped treating food as something that came from nearby. It came from somewhere else, far away, wrapped and labeled, arriving in trucks and stacked under bright lights. You didn't need a pawpaw patch if you could buy canned peaches any week of the year. You didn't need to wait for a fruit that ripened in a narrow window if you could keep a bowl of store fruit on the counter all month. Convenience didn't arrive as a villain. It arrived as relief. It saved time. It made life feel smoother. It made it possible for families to do more, go more places, keep up with the pace that was accelerating all around them. But it also thinned the old skills, the small attentions. It made certain fruits unnecessary. And in America, unnecessary things don't always survive. I remember the way old folks talked about pawpaws, not like a product, like a season. They'd say, "Pawpaws are coming on," the way they'd say, "The river's up," or "The first frost took the beans." Sometimes there was affection in it, sometimes a little impatience. Pawpaws could be fickle. Some years you'd find plenty, some years you'd find nothing but green, hard fruit that never quite got sweet. And pawpaws had a way of ripening all at once, then being gone. One week you'd walk the creek and see them hard as rocks. The next week they'd be falling into the leaves, bruising before you even touched them. So you learned to pay attention. You learned to check. You learned to feel the fruit in your palm, to smell for that faint sweetness that meant it was ready. That kind of attention was once common, not just for pawpaws, for everything. But attention is a fragile inheritance. It can be lost quickly when life speeds up. By the 1960s, families were spending more time in cars. Kids were busier. Television glowed in the living room. Saturday afternoons were no longer automatically for roaming the edges of town or wandering down to the creek. And if you didn't go to the creek, you didn't see what was ripening there. If you didn't see it, you didn't miss it. Pawpaws also carried another problem, one that sounds almost silly until you remember how much American culture started to revolve around appearances. A pawpaw is not a handsome fruit in the way grocery stores taught people to expect fruit to be handsome. It can have dark patches on the skin, even when it's perfect inside. It can look bruised before you even pick it. It can be shaped oddly, like it grew while distracted. And inside, the pulp is soft. No crisp bite, no clean slices. It's the kind of fruit you eat with a spoon, or with your fingers if you don't mind a little mess. It leaves seeds behind. It leaves evidence you ate it. There's a certain kind of mid-century American household that didn't like mess. Not because people were cold, but because life was getting controlled, streamlined. The kitchen became efficient. Lunches became standardized. Fruit became something you could pack neatly. Apples fit that world. Pawpaws didn't. And so, slowly, without anyone intending it, pawpaws became a fruit that belonged to down by the creek, rather than in the yard. And anything that belongs only to the margins is at risk, because margins get cleaned up. There's another quiet pressure that came in those decades too. The pressure of what was considered modern. Being modern meant being up to date. It meant not having the old things people associated with poverty or backwardness. It meant leaving behind what felt wild, unplanned, country. A pawpaw patch could look country. It could look like neglect. It could look like you hadn't kept up with your yard. Some people cut them down for that reason alone, not out of malice, out of pride, out of wanting to belong to the new idea of respectability. You could feel it in the way neighborhoods changed. Fewer vegetable gardens in front yards, fewer chickens, fewer fruit trees left to do as they pleased. The backyard became a place for leisure more than production. A grill, a swing set, a patio, and later a pool. And leisure doesn't require pawpaws. In fact, leisure often requires you to remove anything that drops fruit, attracts insects, or makes a mess. A pawpaw tree, dropping soft fruit that turns quickly, drawing flies and wasps when it overripens, was not what a man wanted near his new concrete patio. So he'd cut it down, or he'd keep mowing until the little shoots stopped coming up. And then, one year, it would be gone. Not mourned, not replaced, just gone. What makes the pawpaw story sad isn't only that the tree disappeared, it's the way it disappeared, without anyone quite noticing, and without anyone feeling responsible. Because pawpaws didn't have a strong place in the commercial world, they didn't have defenders in the usual sense. There were no big pawpaw growers with advertisements, no pawpaw industry with lobbyists, no familiar recipes in the standard cookbooks. Pawpaws lived mostly in oral tradition, neighbors, grandparents, kids swapping stories. And oral tradition can vanish in a single generation. All it takes is for the person who knew the creek path to pass on, and the next family to move in, and the children to grow up without being shown. Then the tree isn't just gone from the yard. It's gone from memory. There are people who lived their whole lives in pawpaw territory who never tasted one, simply because nobody around them talked about it anymore. That's how quiet disappearance works. Not like a fire, like forgetting. Sometimes when I think about those decades, 1940s to 1970s, I think about all the small trades we made. We traded pantry shelves lined with jars for freezer space. We traded seasonality for availability. We traded local knowledge for national uniformity. Some of those trades were good. They brought stability. They reduced hardship. They made it possible for a lot of families to eat better in winter than their grandparents ever could. But something else got traded away too. A pawpaw isn't just a fruit. It's a relationship with place. It's the understanding that not everything worthwhile is built to travel, that some flavors belong to a specific stretch of river bottom, a specific kind of shade, a specific September week. When pawpaws disappeared from backyards, it wasn't only the fruit that went missing. It was the habit of stepping off the sidewalk, the habit of noticing what grows where nobody is selling anything, the habit of letting a yard contain something a little wild. If you could go back to a Midwestern neighborhood in, say, 1952, you might find pawpaws in the back corners where the fence line met the brush, or along an alley where someone had tossed apple cores and kitchen scraps for years. You might find an older woman who knew exactly when to pick them, who could tell by feel, who would open one over the sink and scrape out the pulp with a spoon, as if she were doing something half forbidden. But you'd also find the early signs of change. You'd find new lawns carefully edged. You'd find fewer fruit trees planted for eating, more planted for looks. You'd find kids spending more time inside when the weather was good. And you'd find already the new idea that food was something you purchased rather than something you waited for. By the late 1960s, you'd see it more clearly. The old patches were still out there, but they were becoming the sort of thing only certain people knew. A boy might bring a pawpaw to school, and the other kids wouldn't recognize it. A teacher might wrinkle her nose at the smell. A mother might say, "Don't bring that inside, it'll make a mess." And the child would learn, without anyone meaning to teach it, that the pawpaw belonged outside the circle of normal life. That is how a culture edits itself, not with erases you can see, with small corrections repeated. There's a particular kind of sadness in realizing how much of American life was shaped by what could be shipped. We don't always admit it, but the shape of our diets was chosen by trucks and refrigeration and shelf life. Fruits that traveled became famous. Fruits that didn't became rumors. Pawpaws didn't travel. They ripened too fast. They bruised too easily. They were, in a sense, too honest. And honesty is rarely scalable. So pawpaws stayed where they had always been, near creeks, in patches, under shade, until even those places began to change. Creeks got channelized, woods got cleared for developments, river bottoms got turned into managed spaces, and the old thickets, the ones that had fed kids on late summer afternoons, were cut back. Not because anyone hated pawpaws, because nobody was thinking about them at all. That, maybe, is the hardest part. We like to believe losses happen because someone chose them, or fought for them, or made a decision. But some losses happen because the world got rearranged, and the small things didn't have a place in the new arrangement. Sometimes, late in the season, you'll still find an old pawpaw tree behind a house that's been owned by the same family for decades. You can tell the yards that have been lived in slowly. They have odd corners. They have plants that were kept for reasons beyond looks. A lilac that someone's grandmother planted. A rhubarb clump that refuses to die. A grapevine that's thicker than a wrist. And sometimes, tucked back there, you'll see pawpaw leaves, big, plain, patient. And you'll realize the tree never left. People did. Or the habits did. Or the stories did. It's a strange feeling standing near a tree that once was common enough to be ignored and realizing how rare it has become. Like hearing a bird song you haven't heard since childhood. For a moment, you're not thinking about fruit. You're thinking about time. About how quickly normal can vanish, and how little ceremony accompanies it. I don't think the pawpaw disappeared because America stopped loving flavor. I think it disappeared because America stopped making room for the kind of flavor that requires waiting and knowing and eating close to home. A pawpaw asks something of you, not labor exactly, but attention, presence, a willingness to accept that not everything comes clean and predictable. And in the middle of the century, predictability became a kind of comfort, especially for people who had lived through hardship. The Depression taught folks to crave stability. The war taught them to crave order. And the decades after taught them to crave modernness, which promised both. So pawpaws, with their bruises and their short window and their unruly patches, were quietly pushed aside. Not condemned, just outcompeted. If you listen carefully, you can still hear pawpaws in the way older people speak, if they speak of them at all. Often it comes out as a half-story. My granddad used to. We used to go down by. There was a tree back behind. They don't always finish the thought because the person they'd share it with is gone, or because they're not sure anyone else would understand why it mattered. And maybe that's the real disappearance, not of the tree, but of the shared understanding that some foods belong to a place in a way that can't be replaced. You can buy a lot of fruit now. You can buy it in winter. You can buy it pre-cut, pre-washed, sealed in plastic like it never touched a brand. But you can't buy the moment of finding something ripe in shade and realizing you remembered the right week. You can't buy the smell of river mud and late summer leaves underfoot. You can't buy the feeling of carrying home a fruit you can't explain to anyone who hasn't tasted it. Those things were part of the pawpaw too. And when pawpaws slipped away from backyards, those small moments slipped with them. I sometimes wonder what would have happened if Pawpaws had been a little tougher. If they'd shipped well, if they'd stayed pretty on a store shelf. Maybe they would have been saved by commerce. Maybe they would have become a national fruit with brand names and jingles. But I'm not sure that would have been saving. Because part of what made Pawpaws special was that you couldn't separate them from the place you found them. They were a fruit of edges and understory, a fruit that rewarded people who paid attention to the overlooked parts of a landscape. In a way, Pawpaws were teaching us something, quietly, without asking permission. They were teaching that abundance isn't always loud, that sweetness can be hidden, that not everything worth eating is built for distance. And those are lessons a modern world doesn't always have time for. So the pawpaw tree, once common enough to be ignored, became uncommon enough to be forgotten. And it didn't happen in a single year. It happened 1 yard at a time. A man cut down a patch because it made a mess. A family moved and didn't take the memory with them. A creek path got overgrown, then paved, then erased. A child grew up without anyone pointing at the leaves and saying, "That's a pawpaw." And when the last person in a neighborhood who knew the taste passed on, the pawpaw became just another tree in the background, until even that background was cleared. There are still pawpaws out there, of course. The land remembers longer than people do. In the right places, along the right creeks, under the right shade, they keep growing the way they always have. But the old relationship is thinner now, not gone everywhere, but thinner. And perhaps that's what makes the story linger in the chest a little, like a song you can't quite place. Because it isn't only about a fruit. It's about the way America changed its pace and, in doing so, mislaid certain kinds of knowing. It's about how easily a thing can slip away when it doesn't fit the new shape of life. And it's about how the quiet things, those soft fruits, those shaded patches, those local flavors, often leave without a sound. If you ever walk behind an older house and see broad, simple leaves catching late summer light, you might not think much of it. Just a tree, just shade. But sometimes when the season is right and the air has that early fall softness, you might catch a faint sweetness. You might see a fruit hanging there, half hidden, and you might realize that the past isn't always gone. Sometimes it's just standing quietly at the back of the yard, waiting to be noticed again.